So in 3 days, that wants to look like this. We'll never make it. So we had a bunch of design ideas, and what it came to is a very simple, bold design that puts him in the center and the information that he's working on right there.
We'll drop like 10% the day of the show. People are realizing they're not going to sell tickets. The other losers will never.
Most multi-camera shows shoot from the front, which means things are usually pretty flat. And we're thinking about shooting from the side here, so that you actually can pan from Gore to the information on this little plasma here, and then also up to the big screen here. But it's kind of risky because who knows if the lighting is going to be attractive. Got it. So in the truck with all the monitors, you're the one going, you know, it's the beta, it's the this, it's the that.
Right.
Which it's going to be masked. It doesn't make any difference, really.
This to me is more dramatic. It's a figure and screens. And to sell the screens, you're coming up the angle. His podium is here. Okay. Then he'll walk. So there'll be a podium here. Okay, where he puts his laptop in. And that's the opening where
Yeah, we need to string the rest of the pipe.
very simple spill.
That's
If you see the audience, it's
technique, and as soon as
as little as possible. Plasma here, okay? He's gonna be doing this. He's gonna be looking at this plasma. He's gonna be looking at the audience over there. He's gonna be looking at the audience over there. He's gonna be looking at this plasma. He's gonna be looking at the audience over there. He's gonna be looking at the audience over there. He's looking down. He's gonna be looking over. It's not a ladder. He gets into a lift. What is it called? A
Cherry picker or a man lift?
man lift.
Really?
Man lift. The kind you change light bulbs with? Yeah. Yes, right?
No, it's coming from
I'm
over here.
talking about if the camera's over there.
I think we need to stop cutting down the rainforest.
So why don't you frame up a shot?
Okay.
And if I can look at it, great. If not, just shoot it. But the idea is everything going on his hands moving, and the computer.
In here from the original keynote, the Galileo Earth movie.
The head to toe of this is
Good.
low, is just rocket. How low can I get? Can I get here?
no.
Can I get here?
The pan head will take you to here, and the lens is about another 8 inches above that. So your lens height's about here.
Yes, I definitely want to be on the floor.
Pardon?
I definitely want to be on the floor.
Good. Makes our life easier.
I'd like to introduce you to the camera. This is one of our producers, Lawrence Bender.
Hello.
Camera, Bender.
These are the guys who thought the idea up and who made it all happen.
Very cool.
I'd like to point out that our cameraman is wearing a Stop Global Warming bracelet.
That's right. Can you turn that around?
There you go.
Great to see you. Great to see you.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're here. I can't believe it. I'm not gonna make it through the days without crying. I'm weepy. I'm like
Very
so weepy.
exciting. Wow! Look at that! What a screen! What a screen! Man, oh man. That is so cool. Really how excited I am to see this.
You just can't imagine what's been going on in the last 24 to 48 hours.
So you enter from back here.
Yeah.
Laptop goes here.
Yeah.
It starts with curtains going in. So at first you don't see the big screen.
Listen, do you think I don't know anything about filmmaking?
Yes.
Well, you're right.
This film is going to help shift the debate on this issue.
You know, a lot of the people that were relocated from New Orleans
Are
are now
there.
being evacuated again from Houston. I am going to be.
We can give you.
I'm going to gesture with my right hand.
We'll give you
This
another.
mug.
We'll give you.
So I need to walk over to this side of it if I can. I don't have to. I can do it. I can do it like this. Maybe I'll just do it like this.
Okay, wrap around, get out.
But the point is that it's on his computer.
All right, Petey.
It's on the screen.
Okay.
Here's his computer. This is what how he did it.
Was camera 3 dead center?
Right now, it was for that. Yes, it was.
Because we were going downhill.
But
left.
you can see, yeah, that's the point of mission. But right now, you can see the balance, the symmetry there is kind of cool. Stage right plasma, camera left, stage right plasma, please.
You're gonna pull some light from the
Forward,
right side of his face.
I don't know if you're gonna. Right.
And you still could reduce the.
Brian, graphics, why are we not feeding the plasma, sir?
Okay, but it's helpful for me to see him. There you go.
There we go. Thanks, buddy.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And then, can you cut to the center camera, please?
I want to underscore this point because never above 300 parts per million, and we've already taken it all the way up to here. But that's not the worst part because we're still putting it up there.
It's gonna animate yet, but
It doesn't need to animate.
And the same thing with the close-ups. If you find something great, and then you go slow and rack to someone else. I like that. That was good.
Okay.
You didn't like the beginning of that. Anybody else have a shot? All right.
Let's see.
Ready, something?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a smidge tighter.
I should hold the door.
Michael, you hold your shot with Gore. Brian, this is going to be your push, okay?
the thickness.
This is our very first time trying this presentation with a lot of very complicated media. So there may be some technical glitches. If you see them, just remember this is part of a movie. We're doing this several times, so they will not be in the movie, and just go with it. We are so excited to welcome the former Vice President of the United States, and please help me welcome Al Gore.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for coming. Then when they came back in radio contact, they looked up and they snapped this picture, and it became known as Earthrise, called the Galileo that went out to explore the solar system. And as it was leaving Earth's ecological system, the problem is this thin layer of atmosphere is being thickened by all of the global warming pollution that's being put up there.
Teacher said, of course not. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever
Start
heard.
thinking differently
Stay away now.
about that habit because the consequences were completely and utterly unacceptable. So we had a Cold War. When he showed my class this image, it was already clear that it was going up. I respected him and learned from him so much. I followed this. Some of these young children here are my age. Within less than 50 years, it's going to be here. Causes not only more flooding, but also more drought. This neighboring... A lot of them lined up, tragically, and they almost entirely cut off existence. 2 billion people, and in my lifetime, as it melts, and the open ocean receives that sun's energy instead, we have to keep our eyes on the prize. It's up to us. It's a moral moment. It's your moment. Let's solve this problem. Thank you very much.
That is thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is great too. This is great.
Ryan, go all the way in.
This is great.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good job. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming twice, sir.
He doesn't miss a trick. He doesn't miss a trick.
He got a standing ovation in the control room. That was pretty good.
This DVD is being made a full year after we completed the shooting and Davis Guggenheim completed the making and editing of the movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And in the year that has passed by since, a lot of new evidence has come out. This story continues to unfold. Temperature increases have continued to set records in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, in many parts of the world. New scientific evidence has firmed up the consensus even more than was the case when the movie was made. These additional features are intended to present some of the new facts, the new events, the new evidence, the new findings that have come out since the completion of the movie. Hurricane Katrina played a prominent role in the narrative of An Inconvenient Truth, and one reason is that it happened as we were making the movie. One thing that many people didn't know at the time is that Davis Guggenheim and Leslie Chilcutt and I were scheduled to go with a production crew to the city of New Orleans at the time when Katrina hit. I had been invited by the 50 state insurance commissioners to give my slideshow with an emphasis on the connection between global warming and hurricanes. And their convention was canceled because Hurricane Katrina was looming out in the Gulf of Mexico and headed toward New Orleans. In the year that has passed by since the end of filming for An Inconvenient Truth, there have been several brand new scientific studies that have further firmed up the emerging consensus that links stronger hurricanes with higher ocean temperatures, particularly higher temperatures in the top layer, the top 200 feet, where the heat energy drives strength into these ocean-based storms. There is no scientific consensus linking the absolute number of hurricanes to global warming. There's some indication that on a worldwide basis, the number stays fairly steady. But when hurricanes do form out of these delicate and mysterious atmospheric conditions in the oceans, then global warming makes them stronger. And when they get stronger with more moisture, they become more destructive. Hurricanes and cyclones and typhoons are actually all the same thing. They just have different names depending on the ocean in which they originate. What we call hurricanes are called cyclones in Australia and are called typhoons in Asia. Now, in Australia this past spring, which of course was their fall, they had a long string of unusually large cyclones. There was Larry and Glenda and Monica, and these Category 5 storms did so much damage that it caused the kind of discussion in Australia that we had in the United States. And the CEO of the largest insurance company in Australia, Michael Hawker, looked at their records and said, wait a minute, this is a steady progression since the 1970s. And of course, that's the period of time when the ocean temperatures started going up. Where typhoons are concerned, the movie showed the record-breaking year in Japan a few years ago. This past summer, China was hit by Typhoon Saomai, which was the strongest typhoon in at least 50 years, and more than 1.5 million people were driven from their homes. So this story continues to unfold, and it's up to us to listen to what the scientists are telling us. If we continue to put 70 million tons of global warming pollution into the atmosphere every single day, that will continue to increase global temperatures and the temperatures of the oceans, and that in turn will continue to drive stronger and stronger hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons. It's up to us to take action to turn the thermostat down by turning down the amount of global warming pollution that we're putting up there. That's what's making the hurricanes stronger. We first started shooting this movie in July 2005, and it was hot outside. But we now know that the 12 months that have passed between July 2005 and the end of June 2006 turned out to be the hottest 12-month period in the history of temperature measurements in the United States of America. All kinds of records have been broken this past summer. For example, in northern South Dakota, it reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. City after city saw the all-time heat temperature record broken day after day. We have also seen an update in the record-breaking temperatures in Europe. We showed in the film that incredible heat wave of 2003 that killed more than 35,000 people in Europe. This past summer, those temperature records in many parts of Europe were broken, in Paris, for example. But because of the experience in 2003, they were better prepared. For example, underneath the Eiffel Tower, they set up these giant misters to cool off the tourists. A dramatic example of a phenomenon that we saw unfold in many parts of the world as new measures are taken to try to adapt to these increasing temperatures. We showed in the movie a record-breaking temperature of 122 degrees Fahrenheit in a city in India. This past summer, not too far to the north in Pakistan on the Indian subcontinent, it reached 125.6 degrees Fahrenheit. All over the world, we're seeing temperature anomalies. And here in the United States, all 50 states were well above normal. Not a single state was even near normal, and the majority were way above normal, and many had all-time record-breaking highs. Late in 2005, as Davis Guggenheim was finishing up his editing of An Inconvenient Truth, a brand new scientific study was released. It was too late to put it into the movie, but I show it in my slideshows now. And it gives us a brand new way of seeing why we have to stop putting all of this carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere. Now, the movie demonstrates some of the problems that are occurring because ocean temperatures are going up. And one example used has to do with coral reefs. As the temperature of the water increases, many of the coral reefs are bleached, which means they look like white bones. That whiteness is actually the calcium carbonate of the coral reef. The reef is made by little animals, coral polyps, that take calcium carbonate from the seawater and convert it into the skeleton of the reef. And of course, coral reefs they've been described as the rainforests of the ocean, meaning that they are places where there's a fantastic diversity of life. And so the dying of coral reefs is really a very serious matter. And the main cause of it has been the increasing temperatures. But this brand new study that came out late last year shows that there is also another cause of stress for coral reefs and other animals in the ocean, coming from the sheer chemical burden of all the CO2 that is being absorbed into the oceans because of our activities around the world generating this global warming pollution. We put 70 million tons of CO2 into the Earth's atmosphere every day. We've got to stop that. But 25 million tons is absorbed into the world's oceans every day. And a lot of that becomes carbonic acid and changes the pH level of the oceans, meaning, of course, the oceans are made more acidic. And when that happens, it makes it very difficult for these coral polyps to use the calcium carbonate that they rely on to make coral reefs. So here are 3 brand new slides that illustrate the findings from this major new study. The first of them shows the ideal conditions in the ocean for coral reefs to form. The blue dots represent the coral reefs in the Western Hemisphere and in the Eastern Pacific. In 1880, before the Industrial Revolution really started having its big impact, the green areas demonstrate the ideal ocean water conditions for coral reefs to be healthy. Now, the second slide shows that after so many decades of CO2 pollution, those ideal areas have shrunk dramatically, and many coral reef systems are now in water that is too acidic for them to thrive. But in the third slide, if we continue business as usual for the next 45 years, those ideal areas for coral reefs completely disappear, and in fact, there aren't even any adequate areas for coral reefs. Now, this is extremely important because it doesn't affect only corals. It also affects everything in the ocean that makes a shell, from lobsters and shrimp to starfish to, most importantly, the tiny little plankton at the base of the ocean food chain. Because as the ocean becomes more acidic because of all the pollution we're putting into it, they have great difficulty making shells. So the entire food chain in the oceans can be completely disrupted. We have to stop putting all of this CO2 into the Earth's environment. We're already changing the ocean's chemistry in major ways. One of the manifestations has to do with the algae blooms that are springing up. For example, in the Baltic Sea, there are these epic algae blooms. Here is the ferry from Stockholm to Copenhagen. They had to close their beaches because of the blooms and the fish kills that resulted from them. It's similar to the phenomena that we call red tide around Florida, which contributes to these so-called dead zones that are multiplying and expanding in size. And actually it does favor some forms of life. For example, jellyfish thrive in this new ocean environment. And all over the world this past summer, we saw news stories about beaches being closed, in one case nuclear reactors shut down, because the jellyfish population has been soaring. And interestingly, in Japan, they have in the past had a rare sighting or two of giant jellyfish, 6 feet across, 100 pounds in weight. This past year, they had tens of thousands of them. These look like creatures out of a science fiction movie. They ripped the nets of the fishing fleets and caused serious economic harm to quite a few areas that are dependent on fishing revenue in Japan. It almost makes you want to say, hey, Pharaoh, a new plague is trying to get our attention. But again, the point of all this is we have the power and the capacity to change this and stop putting all the pollution into the Earth's environment that's causing these unwelcome changes. We just have to summon the will to act. Over the years, I've come to think of the climate crisis, or what many people call global warming, as really a symptom of an underlying deeper crisis that has to do with the relationship between us and planet Earth. And that relationship has changed. And in the context of human history, the change has come pretty recently and fairly suddenly. The relationship between our civilization and the ecological system of the planet has been disrupted by a combination of factors. The technology and science revolution, our way of thinking. But the first factor, the population explosion, is one that I get a lot of questions about as I travel around the world giving this slideshow. And in the movie, I demonstrated the rapid increase in population, particularly since World War II. But here's a section that we filmed during the making of the movie that goes farther back to a period between 160 and 195,000 years ago, when many scientists believe that the human species first emerged in something approximating our modern form.
The scientists say that our species emerged between 160 and 195,000 years ago. And I'm always a little reluctant to get into this because we had a trial in my home state, and let's say for purposes of argument that the scientists are right and our species began around 160,000 years ago. And I don't think there's really a conflict between evolution and faith. I really don't. But if we start our measurement this far back, it took a long time before we emerged and migrated from Africa to the Eurasian landmass. The last ice age ended about 11,000 years ago. The agricultural revolution and all the other significant events of history took place during this period, and until the time of Julius Caesar and Jesus Christ, it took that long before we got to a population of 250 million people. By the time Christopher Columbus sailed, we were at 500 million people. And by the time of our Declaration of Independence, we had reached a population in the world of 1 billion people. When my generation, the baby boom generation, was born after World War II, the population had just crossed the 2 billion mark. Now, I'm in my 50s, and it's already gone to almost 6.5 billion. And if I reach the demographic expectation for the baby boomers, it'll go over 9 billion. So if it takes 10,000 generations to reach 2 billion, and then in one human lifetime, ours, it goes from 2 billion to 9 billion, something profoundly different's going on right now.
A lot of people look at that dramatic graph showing the recent increases in human population, and they're puzzled when they hear scientists describe the world's efforts to slow down the population explosion as a success story, because it's clearly still increasing rapidly. We're adding the equivalent of the entire population of Mexico every single year to the population of the Earth. But it is a success story in this sense. The rate of increase is slowing down, and there is an historic change happening all over the world in the size of families. And the scientists have a phrase that sounds a little like gobbledygook. They talk about the demographic transition. And what they mean by that is a change from a pattern representing high birth rates and high death rates, changing to low birth rates and low death rates. And that change is something we've gone through in the United States. My grandparents were all from very large families, and most of the people watching this DVD are from families that 3-4 generations ago had great-grandparents with 5, 6, 8, 10 siblings. And now, of course, the average U.S. family is less than 2 children. And that's happening in many places around the world. In parts of Europe and Japan, they're now having negative population growth. That's causing problems of a different kind. But even in the parts of the world that have the fastest increasing populations, they're slowing down the rate of increase. So even though the population will continue to increase, the scientists now believe that instead of going to 13 or 14 or 15 billion people, it's likely to stabilize at 9.1, or slightly higher. And even though that represents another 2.5 billion people in the lifetimes of most people watching this DVD, it still represents a success story. An African leader from more than a half century ago, Julius K. Nyerere, said, "The most powerful contraceptive in the world is the confidence that your children will survive." So solving the climate crisis is connected to making other changes that will make our world a better place. One of the most interesting places on the entire planet to see the impact of the climate crisis is Greenland. It has the second largest amount of ice of anywhere in the world, second only to Antarctica. And as the movie pointed out, the melting of parts of Greenland has now accelerated dramatically. And many scientists are worried that if that change speeded up, it could have a very dramatic impact on sea level worldwide. Well, since the movie came out, a lot of new evidence has been presented by the scientists. For example, they now know that last year 50 cubic miles of ice melted off of Greenland. And one of the most interesting new bits of evidence comes in the form of glacial earthquakes. They started noticing these on Greenland in 1993. And between 1993 and 1999, the number of them doubled from 7 to 15. But between 1999 and 2005, the number doubled again. And last year, they now know that there were 32 glacial earthquakes on Greenland between 4.5 and more than 5 on the Richter scale. Now, anybody knows that an earthquake rated 5 on the Richter scale is enormous. And there have been lots of those on Greenland in the past year. And the scientists say that what that almost certainly means is it's evidence of destabilizing changes on Greenland where the ice is shifting, probably because of this increased and accelerating melting that lubricates the surface of the bedrock and makes it easier for the ice to shift. Some people are familiar with driving on a highway after a light rain, and there's something they call hydroplaning, and it can be dangerous. The little sheet of water between the tire and the highway can make the car slip. That's similar to what the scientists describe as happening on Greenland as more and more water goes down to the bedrock and makes that ice unstable. But these glacial earthquakes represent another clear warning that we have to stop putting all of this global warming pollution up there. Another one of the new areas that scientists have focused on since the completion of An Inconvenient Truth has been the new evidence coming out linking global warming with an increased incidence of major wildfires all around the world. Here in the United States, we've had a terrible fire season, and the new studies now show a dramatic and steady increase in the number of fires, the area burned, the amount of damage caused, all correlated with increasing temperatures. Now, there are other factors because land use patterns have a role to play. But it's now clear from several new studies that have come out just in the last 6 months that there's a direct correlation between the number of wildfires, continent by continent, and the increasing temperatures. And the scientists say the reason is as the soils dry out, the vegetation dries out, and that makes the landscape more vulnerable to fire. One study from the insurance industry also correlates the number of big disaster losses due to lightning as a function of increasing temperature. So if you get drier vegetation and then more lightning, you get more wildfires. And unfortunately, more fires means an additional amount of CO2 put into the Earth's atmosphere. In the western part of the United States, in the summer of 2006, there were a massive number of unusually large wildfires. There is also a new scientific ability to pinpoint by satellite the incidence of fires around the world. From August 9th to August 18th, during the summer of 2006, here are the fires that were burning. This is a time-lapse image for those 9 days, showing the fires burning all around the world. Yet another reason why we have to quickly rein in the amount of global warming pollution that's causing these destructive changes. An increased rate of soil moisture evaporation can cause sudden and dramatic changes. The movie shows some of the areas in the world where that has already happened.
Here's a projection of what happens to the soil moisture in the United States with the doubling of CO2. Remember, under business as usual, we're going to double CO2 in less than 50 years. And that, according to the scientists, will lead, among other things, to a loss of soil moisture of up to 35% in vast growing areas of our country. But if we don't act quickly and we allow that CO2 concentration not only to double but to quadruple, this is what the scientists say will happen to soil moisture in the U.S. Up to 60% losses. But how do we possibly debate something like this in the traditional framework of our political dialogue? This is so catastrophic, we obviously cannot allow this to happen. But we're headed right toward this right now.
A brand new area has been affected by a continuing drought that has been studied in depth since the movie was completed. And while it's too early to tell whether or not this will be the kind of disaster that was depicted around Lake Chad in Africa, nevertheless, the Amazon is so important as a component of the Earth's environmental system that scientists are riveted on the unfolding changes there. The long continuing drought of the last couple of years has caused the drying out of many parts of the Amazon, including parts of the Amazon River bed. Here is a large boat resting on the sand on the bottom of what was part of the Amazon River. Here is another part of the Amazon River where a horse is walking across what is now a desert landscape. This hopefully will be temporary. But if we continue to put more and more global warming pollution up there, the odds of this kind of change occurring in many parts of the world go up. We have to prevent it. For me, some of the most interesting images in the movie and the slideshow are from Alaska and from Siberia, where the melting and thawing of the permafrost, that frozen soil that's always been frozen, now is causing buildings to collapse, producing that phenomenon known as drunken trees. It's even affecting cemeteries. But far more important than any of that is the impact that could take place in Siberia and part of Alaska, where there's a huge quantity of frozen carbon dioxide and methane that could dramatically increase the amount of global warming pollution in the Earth's atmosphere if it all thawed out.
Here is the infrastructure of the world that the international group that just studied this says is at risk from the thawing of the permafrost. This is the Arctic Ocean here, Greenland again, US and Canada, Eurasia. Look at what's going on in Siberia. It's being hit harder by this than anything. And you might say, okay, that's not a bad thing for the permafrost to thaw. Think again. The leading Russian scientist who studies this says that what's going on in Siberia right now is an ecological landslide. And here's what he's referring to. There's an area the size of France and Germany combined that contains 70 billion metric tons of methane
that's now beginning to thaw and release that methane into the atmosphere. And going way back in history, there have been times when methane has suddenly been released. It's not a good thing, particularly if it's this much. So there are a lot of these tipping points that we need to be concerned about. It's not just the gradual warming. There are some bad things that could happen if we're not careful and don't get this under control pretty quickly. Here's a graphic that shows the problem that we have to avoid. The total amount of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere, most of it because of human activity, is 730 trillion tons. But if we crossed this tripwire, this tipping point, and allowed the thawing of these areas in Siberia and Alaska, that could release frozen carbon that would, in a relatively short period of time, double the amount of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. It's another reason why we have to take action quickly, and we can, but we must in order to stop short of crossing that tipping point, which if we did would make it an awful lot harder to solve the problem. There have been a lot of new developments since the completion of this movie. Many new scientific studies confirming the seriousness of the crisis that we face. A lot more certainty still in the scientific consensus around the world, and more pollution, unfortunately. But there have also been a lot of very positive changes. In the United States, for example, public opinion has begun to shift pretty decisively toward a point of view that says, hey, we can do this and we've got to face up to it. We can solve this and improve our economy and our way of life at the same time. A lot of prominent leaders have changed their points of view on global warming just in the past year. Many religious and faith leaders from various denominations have now come forward saying this is a moral issue. It is a spiritual issue. We have to take action. Some political leaders are beginning to change their positions. A lot of business leaders are changing their positions. New businesses and CEOs, corporations, every week are now joining this new bandwagon saying, we want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. But most importantly of all, millions of people who have read about it, who have seen the movie, who have talked with their friends and family and neighbors about this issue, are now part of a growing movement to move the United States of America and countries around the world into a different posture, saying, this is up to us. This is our time. We have to change this, and we can change it. It's going to be good. It's going to be positive. We have the ability. Let's get with it.